specifically like electronic based psychedelic music, which I personally think has just, it's just such a profoundly, it just feels like there's just such potential. That thing I was saying last night about the ability to build a universe and then enter inside of it. But what is actually going on? And I'm sure I would love to hear from the traditional point of view, what is actually happening.
Today's show is with two incredible musicians who are not only pioneers in their field of music, but are also creating music for the psychedelic experience. And we're fresh off of a debut from Jon Hopkins, who created an hour-long Music for Psychedelic Therapy, which is absolutely stunning, and East Forest, who contributed to a crucial component of that album, a key song called Sitting Around the Fire with Ram Dass. And these guys are deep in both music and medicine and the curation of intentional space to allow us to experience the numinous, to experience the transcendent states that these medicines have been shown over and over to be able to provide, especially when you have guidance from music like these gentlemen are able to produce. I can't wait to share this conversation with you. The truth is that we're all the master, we're all the healer, we're all the mystic.
Give it up one time for Aubrey Marcus.
East Forest, Jon Hopkins, we did something pretty wild and incredible last night. You guys are both on the forefront of this new genre of thing, which is one part concert and one part absolute mind-bending cosmic ceremony. And we just did an example of that. And this is the first time you guys collaborated in that way where you were both offering it. But this is a very interesting thing that we just put out into the collective yesterday.
Yeah. I think concerts though are always a form of ceremony, and I think we know that. It's just kind of fun when you lean into it, So, what was it like for you? How is it different as a from what you've experienced with other concerts?
Well, I've experienced your version of this before, right? And it's always really special because you're able, through your looping machines, through the live instrumentation that you're playing, you're actually creating something that moves with the energetics of the space that you're in. So it's always a bit different. Some things are similar, but it's always a bit different. And last night was, to me, just the most special version of that. I think it was the collective intention of everybody there, the space itself, the time. I think the gravity of the situation of bringing Jon in, who, we both admire for different reasons. You as a musician and as a human, me as just like somebody who's guided me over the last year and a half through some of the most potent journeys of my life, starting with the Meditation Bowl Ascension track, which came in right when ketamine came into my life. And was like, it was this huge synchronicity of, wow, he's making real magic happen sonically in concert with this medicine that I'm just becoming familiar with. So there was this gravitas to the event and how it was all laid out, all of the mats in a circle, everything kind of coming together in that way. And so we go through yours, and your concert was stunning, like stunningly beautiful.
So good.
And really like I don't know, it was just exceptional to be able to be in there with you and see how you and also your partner Radha were weaving through the space and creating this experience that broke down the fourth walls. I really think that's another beautiful thing that you're doing with Radha's help, playing certain instruments in the crowd, because she would come over to our section and you were playing on stage, and then she would play like different bells and chimes.
You know where that came from is some ayahuasca ceremonies where there was a shaman that I worked with who would move around the room a lot. And I'd know, like, when you're in the space and you're really like, deep in this cosmic space, it was if he was literally, the sound was just in different places because he's moving around the room. And I thought it was so playful. Yeah. And so I wanted to bring in that idea, like the sound moving around the room. And so when you're in the space, it's not just statically in one place. It feels fun, Yeah,
you get this spatial, multidimensional thing. I mean, I have my Mindfold mask on. So, but in the way that the sound was reverberating off of all the different walls, we're in a metal building. We're in this like metal spaceship of different shapes and acoustic quality. and then to have the sound bouncing off different things, so it's hard to even tell where it's coming from, and then to have local things happening. It was just a really special experience to go through that. So I, of course, knowing that it was a ceremony, took my ketamine prescription and ramped it up, not fully aware that I was going to be doing an interview at the end. I was like several fast dissolves in when someone's like, so what we're going to do, instead of questions from the audience, you guys are just going to talk on stage.
You asked if you're involved in the Q&A. We're like, you're definitely involved. Yeah.
I was like, excellent. Yeah. This will be fun. But I wasn't going to miss this. This is a very special thing, and I wanted to, get the most out of it for myself. So I was in the ceremony in that space, and it was really incredible to go through that in that environment at that time with you, and have just one of those other unique experiences that I could add to my list of experiences I've shared with you already.
Thank you for hosting it. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, well, we've been doing that for a bit, but it took it to a whole nother space, adding in Jon into the mix. And it was like, I just felt like I learned so much about like what ceremony music can be, and expanding what we think about that. And you're bringing like a kind of sophistication to this that I'm hoping we see more of, because kind of in the past, a lot of this music is, in the modern sense, has been it's kind of been relegated into the new age, and it's kind of been discarded. And honestly, some of it maybe isn't the most interesting musicality, and so
it has very tactful here.
Yes. So going back to the positive, it was just great to see like something that says high musicianship, and to hear it on such a big system like that too is such a treat, to hear like all these other treats going on with the low end. Yeah. And how that's just a physical sensation. You remember that music essentially is like a physical experience.
Absolutely. So I'll get into then the next part of that. So the one part, if we're going to do this again, we got to work on the break in between.
No break, maybe.
Yeah, like somehow those got to merge a little better, because that was kind of intense, because we're like right in the middle of the set. We did a good job. Everybody held it together, but it was like, whoa, what's going on? Like this is, because you guys were switching up, striking some things which made some sense, but ultimately finding a way to bridge right in. But anyways, we made it through that part, had an interesting journey to the bathroom, as many journeys to the bathroom go in ceremony space. Like, come on, body, you know how to pee. You've done this so many times.
Always the bathroom mirror.
Got this. You've got this. You got this, Aubrey. Don't worry about the people looking at you. They don't care. They're in their own journey. So I have my own journey with that. Get back in, and then the music just kind of starts. And
I didn't want to say anything because I'm not, well, firstly, I kind of felt the way the album begins, and people will hopefully be hearing it at this point, it starts with quite a statement, which is, it's a tincture symbol mixed with a kind of rising tone, which was an idea that, like most of my ideas come to me in the studio and I'm writing and I respond to sounds I'm hearing, but it's the only time this has ever happened. I was walking down the street, and like a bolt from the blue was just, I knew the album started with that note, and it's an F, and it must start there and it must rise. And then another one starts behind it, and another one starts behind it. And I have no idea why, but like when we talked about this after you first said it, you said it gave you that kind of almost like a lurching feeling in the stomach, which is like it's
a fantastic opener.
Something's about to happen.
I was like, oh shit. And then that happened, and I could feel it. Like I could feel the whole place go like, oh shit!
It gives you that feeling that what did I do? Feeling
I often think
wait a minute, what did I take? Yeah,
I think that quite often about this album, like what is it? But I just thought, rather than having me kind of shyly mumble what the album's called and introduce myself, which would not be my thing, I just let's let that note do that,
and it did,
and we can talk afterwards, and I'll feel more comfortable. But it was just. It was such an overwhelming and beautiful thing to see so many receptive people listening to something which has been private. I think you guys have both heard it, and maybe 15, 20 other people.
Yeah.
The biggest group listening I've had so far was 9 people. And with each increase in numbers of people hearing it, it's just like, it's a real privilege. So yeah, thank you both for helping the event.
The privilege is ours.
Yeah, man, and having everyone listen to it so attentively and such a, giving their attention. That's what we say is like the greatest gift you can give is your attention in anything. And when you do it like that collectively with a music experience like that, it's special.
And
most shows, people are not really paying attention.
Oh,
fully.
there was
and
no
certainly
option.
not everybody.
There was no option for
Yeah.
not paying attention.
Yeah.
From the moment that thing started, everybody was
Yeah.
dropped in, and the intensity of it. I mean, I've listened to this. I've listened to this album many times on good headphones, and it's lovely and it's powerful. But in that room, with that sound quality and that resonance, it was this unavoidable journey. Like we were on a rocket ship, and the intensity and softness, the blend of both, was really stunning to behold. And I was, I'm in the audience, of course, and people are having experiences. Like as this thing's building, it moves into the Teos Caves section of it, which is this beautiful descent. And we'll talk a little bit about this beautiful descent down into the cave and then this emergence. And it builds in this sonic intensity. And people are like starting to have to breathe, like, and then some people are having to go through some mantras and chants, like,
Really?
like keep it together. It was keep it together sounds is really what it was like. And people are like,
Expunging.
yeah. They're like, some like Hindu chants like Ram, Krishna Ram, like these different things are coming and breath works and then moans. And then people are like, really like, it was a journey at that point. And just like in an ayahuasca circle, you hear the sounds of purging, you'll hear the sounds of what the shamans would call trabajo, the work of that experience. Like that's a beautiful aspect of this, is it's in some aspects so gentle and so sweet, but in other aspects so powerful that you were just riding people through this thing, and it was just building and building, and then the soft periods where you get to integrate, and then rebuilding again into the pulsing heart. And then, of course, landing with that beautiful collaborative track you guys have sitting around the fire, which Ram Dass is channeling that divine father energy of like one of the true enlightened mystics of our era, of our time. And it was really like a mind-bending experience to have you open and lead us through this interactive cosmic journey on your own. And Ram Dass's voice is introduced, and then Jon drops in with this just now we're on a whole other type of rocket ship, and this whole thing is a spaceship, and we're all entering into this astral cosmic journey together. I mean, it was something.
Yeah, and then the bookend was the improvisational piano piece,
Which was
blew
holy
my mind.
shit.
Blew my mind.
That was a surprise to me as well. So I think it was like 2 days before the event, you texted me to say, if there was a piano, would you play it? Perhaps? I was like, I hadn't thought of that. But then, I mean, first and foremost, that's what I've done my whole life since I was like 3 or 4. I played the piano, and I just thought, wouldn't it be nice to just creep on stage where no one can actually see that I'm there?
It was nice.
And join in, in with the end of sit around the fire.
And so seamless too.
Yeah.
Like, so it seems like everything you do is, and you said the word craftsmanship yesterday, like sound craftsmanship. It's so immaculately crafted. And even how you blended your own piano with the end of the, I was like, that was impressive.
Well, it's a beautiful old instrument. Was it like 60, 70 years old or something like that?
Older. I think it's 100 years old, but I'm sure it was been worked on. But it's old Kanab piano, and we because it was last minute, we didn't have a lot of options, and I wasn't going to have a piano at this show for various reasons. But we have been having them at the shows, and then it just hit me. I feel like I really feel like we should do this, but I didn't want to bring it unless we both used it.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't really not use it.
I was really hoping you'd say yes.
but what was cool about it was that, because I'd been feeling nervous because, this, as I was saying to you last night, this was such a private experience, this making of this album. Obviously, as an artist, you always go through this transition. You make something which is coming from your deepest inner stuff, process through everything you've been through. And then one day you're like, okay, here it is, everyone, and that has normally felt quite like a celebration, like a not an easy thing, but like a triumphant moment, because it would be my normal shows, my previous albums, like all the big tracks are like heavy techno and they're danceable, and it's all about jumping around and, maybe more of an MDMA thing. But so you do a gig and you're just like, yeah, this is fucking great. People like that drop. And, obviously it had the spiritual overtones. I liked the idea for years of blending the sort of sneaking in the spirituality into dance music, of which there's a lot of crossover anyway, and of course, particularly in tribal drumming type stuff, it's not separate. But this one, I just took all of that away. So I was nervous to share it, and I thought I was nervous about the fact that we were going to do public speaking because that's not my thing. But it turned out I was nervous about people hearing this record because I could, on a deeper level, like not up here but down here, I could feel that everyone was truly, truly listening. And what they're truly listening to is the deepest thing in myself. It's like, fucking hell, what have I done? I've shown my whole hand.
Yeah.
And what actually chilled me out was playing the piano and going back to what I've always done, which is improv, and that was 100% improvised. And I found out from my wonderful sound engineer, Dana, that it's been recorded too. So
amazing.
We can share it after this.
Fantastic.
It was such a beautiful way to integrate after such a powerful experience. Now, granted, my experience was particularly powerful because of, the ketamine that I dissolved in my mouth. But nonetheless, sober or not, it was such a journey, and to have that nice soft landing to help us all like come home in a very sweet way. Because even Ram Dass's words, the words are so potent themselves.
Yeah.
It is in a way a beautiful integration, but even still, you're still digesting, like, let the judgments and opinions of the mind be judgments and opinions of the mind, and you exist beyond that. And you're like, damn, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
Like whatever that is perfect, but it's still like there's an intensity to it, and a gravity to it. But to have the sweetness of the piano at the end, it's a really, really nice way to do it. And then, of course, we got on stage and talked, and I thought that was
very nice.
That was really nice as well.
Because you were high.
I was so high.
And I've done a lot of interviews the last 20 years, but never have I
You
looked
win the prize. This is the highest interviewer.
Yeah, looked into the eyes of the one asking the
in
questions.
front of an audience, too. It's amazing.
But it was cool because, we had a fun chat. But
well, I felt like I at least was in resonance with everybody else.
The heart was open.
The heart was open.
Yeah. It added because it certainly made me relaxed. And I felt like I was sharing some quite personal stuff in front of loads of people. Again, never done it before. But, to go back to the point you were saying about the intensity of the record, like I like the idea that it can be used as a friend of mine said he was like working with it on in the background. Like at first my ego was like, how dare you? this must be worshipped. That was just after you finish, you're very precious about an album, and I'm sure you feel that. But, part of the letting go of it is moving beyond that. Now I love the fact that someone can use it in that way, but one of the real goals of it is to say to people that this genre of music, whatever genre that is, it can be very intense. It's as intense as a techno album for me. And it's like the loud passages are as loud as anything else I've done. Possibly louder because you don't have to fit in all that kick drum room. There's more room for subs and drones, and you talked about the low end. So much bass, and the bass that was rattling the walls in a way which I loved because it was in resonance. Like the building was joining in. But I guess I don't know why. I mean, I don't make easy music. You can listen to it in an easy way, but I think it's, for whatever reason, what's coming out at the moment has some very long, intense sections which are followed, like you say, by a breath, and they build up again, and it's as much of a mystery to me, really.
A lot of your music plays around with low end. Yeah, that I think a lot of people don't get to really get the full gift of all that wonderful juice. When I first heard "Sit Around the Fire,"
juice.
I heard it on my studio system, and I was hearing this beautiful sub pad at the beginning, and I was like, that's so bold to put that in because a lot of people won't hear it, but it's a really integral part of the feeling of the song. And then last night, in spades. We're getting all of that low mid and low end stuff.
So that sound is a recording of just outside my window.
It's just London streets, you said?
Not London streets, it's like Surrey, where my mum used to live. I just took some field recordings because she lived near the River Thames, so it's like, and I just had that sound named as outdoors. But over the years, I've processed it in loads of different ways. So it was a very particular moment that stretches back, I don't know, it's like 15 years ago or something. But I put it in different effects for each time I use it, and it just manipulated it. And what I wanted was this feeling of like a fire, basically, but a good fire, not an out of control raging fire, but something that grounds you as well, because there's something. I didn't just want to come in with his voice or with your voice and our voice combined, which we have in there as well, but just that. Yeah, it's like a very low tone, which I think settles you. Even if you can't hear it, it's doing something, maybe.
I mean, that's one thing that both of you guys have in common is you use a lot of the instrumentation of the world, of the natural world, and you do it in different ways. But there's just a real beauty of being able to capture an experience of nature, a moment in time, the vibration, the resonance of what the universe is playing in a particular place. And it's like it's not just a recording of the sounds, it's a recording of the essence of that thing. And that's why it's just so beautiful. And then you can take that essence and then manipulate it and modify it into ramping up the intensity of that essence. So it's not just the casual essence of that, it's the essence of that, in the strongest concentrated form, like boiling down ayahuasca from a giant vat into like a thick black brew that just blasts you off. Like all of a sudden it's outside instead of just outside.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's this different thing, but both of you play with that in a beautiful way. Your coyote, has become this like signature thing.
I use it a lot. I definitely should
it's
probably
amazing.
Swap out some sounds.
I kind of want like a coyote soundboard for myself.
I like that one a lot. It's true.
It was great when that came in, because I haven't seen you play before, and it was, coyotes, cool.
Sometimes I look at some of those samples in the live setting, I'm like, man, I've had that one on there for quite a while, But, the greatest hits of nature.
Have you ever pressed the wrong one at a really
of course.
sensitive moment?
Yeah, I mean, last night it was so dark too. I was having a hard time like seeing what I was pressing, and it's like sometimes that happens, and you never know what's going to come out.
Yeah,
but that's part of the beauty of having it be open ended like that. Like you have to like trigger things and create things because it always is a little different, and you have the freedom to make it completely different.
Yeah,
which is really nice.
One of the things I just sat with. Incredible shaman, Maestro Orlando Chuandama from the Quechua tradition. And we're in Costa Rica, in the jungle of Costa Rica. And obviously every jungle has its own sounds, but this has its own jungle and ocean sounds that are there. And so he would roll in this carpet of icaros as we're in, and just this intensity of this thick, rich carpet of sound that he would bring through, and then pause and integrate. And it was all of the sounds of the crickets and all of the sounds of the wind and the sounds of the ocean that also provided this backdrop. And doing it in the absence of that is just not anywhere the same.
That's why I started making those breaks in those records, like Music for Mushrooms, with the field recordings, because it was from ceremonies where that's what they would do. And they would have these breaks between the icaros, and it was the natural sounds. And it was so important. It was sort of like this important bridge to the next room you're about to go into. And all those things I felt like were not accidents. Like they're forms of technology they'd figured out over many years. Like this helps. This is a way of doing things, that the tempo of the ceremony. And I wanted to learn from that and say, well, there's probably a good reason why they figured this out. Maybe I can incorporate this into more modern context.
And when I listened to Music for Mushrooms and there was those breaks, I think I commented maybe even on another podcast, it was like, how did he know? Like, how did Krishna know that that's what I needed right at this moment in time? And the way that, and both of you have done this in different ways, but the way that there's almost like a vibrato to the whole thing, which is the way that mushrooms works in the body. It kind of like vibrates part of your soma in a way that the cells are kind of moving in a different way. And the trees themselves are vibrating as your body, everything is in this resonance, and the whole album has that. And then these nice, like beautiful pauses. And so you created, of course, Music for Mushrooms, and then you've created Music for Psychedelic Therapy, but the length of it being an hour versus the length of yours, which is what, 5 hours?
Yeah, but the new album's in
2 hours.
A soundtrack for the Psychedelic Practitioner Volume 2, and I just find it amazing that like we both essentially were doing the same thing at the same time independently. Like we're both made psychedelic guidance albums. I guess maybe it's a pandemic thing. I don't know. I mean, it was for me.
Or it's a collective. It's a collective desire. Both of you guys are listening. Your antenna is up, and the world is. I strongly believe is saying, hey, like we need these medicines and we need the tools to help bring people to this, because we have to come to a state where we collapse the polarity. We get to a united polarity. We see each other beyond the identity, beyond our differences and creeds and opinions about whatever thing is happening in the culture. And these are the tools that are creating the backdrop that's helping. And I think you guys are both absolutely on the pioneering front end of this, because there's been other music that's been nice in in ceremony before. Like the Devi prayer is lovely to play in a variety of different things,
like
right?
That.
And
Craig
Priss
it's amazing.
He's very good, but
very
nonetheless,
comforting.
it's a song here and a song here.
Yeah.
It's not woven with the intention of this is for ceremony. And I love how obvious you guys were in the naming of it too. You're like, no. Let's be straight up here.
Really
this
went,
is for
clear.
this.
Yeah.
Let's be clear.
Yeah. I really went for that, but that wasn't a choice. Honestly, it wasn't a choice. Like I have this, so I suppose my kind of the more spiritual experiences with ketamine have been mostly this year. I've had them before, but intentional deep dive experiences have been this year. And when I was in the early stages of making this record, I was listening through to tracks in progress, but also things like that Devi prayer and some sort of Kundalini and other types of mantra music and some just general songs that I love, and then a few of the the Tios piece and I went very it was a strong dose, and I just returned, and it was as if it was written in front of me. Music for psychedelic therapy. You have no choice. You have to call it that. And then there was a part of me resisting that because I don't want to box it in a way, but and I'm obviously always going to be saying to people it's also a piece of music and you can listen to it in any way you like. But that title was just it was no choice, and it because I had experiences. So my good friend, Dr. Rosalind Watts, who was the clinical lead on the psilocybin trials that we had in London at Imperial College, we became friends a while ago, and she asked me to help with some of the track selections that they were using for their depression patients. And she had picked some amazing stuff, and I selected some. She had some East Forest in there. In fact, that was how I first heard of your stuff in 2018.
No way.
Yeah, that was my first encounter with you.
Huh.
And is there a track called Grounded?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Radha is nodding.
Yes.
You're not sure.
Yes, there is. It's from a ceremony. It's a ceremony track.
Really lovely. Anyway, so and we put some of my longer form stuff in there, and generally just we're talking about it together, and I just I think it wasn't a conscious thing at the time, but the part of me was just like, we need not to have 100 different musicians.
Yes, this is it.
6 hours. I mean, obviously, I'd love for this album to be 6 hours long. It's just that it might take me 6 more years.
Great.
And I will do volume 2. I mean, that is definitely the plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
But just this idea of having one energy hold.
It's so
that's
important.
That's the key.
It's so
and in
important.
electronic modern music, that isn't really a thing, because it just doesn't the long form stuff. And and you've started doing that, and I'm gonna keep doing it.
The only way it's been feasible for me to do though is by improvising it live in ceremonies and essentially recording it, because it's true, the task of sitting in the studio and thinking I need to make 5 hours of music or 2 or 1, that's just enormous. But something about like we'll open up to the improvisational space in a ceremony. It adds a kind of freedom. Of course, you could say to yourself, maybe none of this will work out, and that's fine, but let's just record it and see what happens. And the In album was 5 ceremonies that were virtual on YouTube Live, which I never would have done. But because of the pandemic, the same friend, Lewis, who pushed me into doing ceremonies 13 years ago, said, we're doing one virtually. And I said, I've never live streamed before. He's like, well, it's Saturday. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. And we just did it. And it turns out there are advantages.
What's the significance of it being Saturday? May I ask? It's Saturday. We do things on
how it
Saturday.
goes,
It's the day where we do things.
Yeah, exactly.
Sunday is a day of rest.
Saturday we do new things.
Yeah.
But it allowed like you start just having, you record them all. Now you've got 25 hours of playing, and in there's probably a few hours of some really magical, like something came through that's from the medicine. And I would love to see that from you too, because I can't, like what we saw on the improvisation on the piano. If I gave you the landscape to say, okay, we're going to do a 2-hour ceremony with an audience, and they're going to be doing it just like they were, just let come through whatever wants to come through. There would be so many gems.
There's also a way, I think, to weave in that piece that I was talking about, the bowl piece.
Oh yeah.
It's a unbelievable 30-minute chunk. That's this really powerful cosmic journey. It doesn't fit exactly in this same hour piece, right? But a way to bridge those would be
before
really,
or after,
really beautiful.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what is really interesting is that was supposed to be on the album, and so there's track 1, Welcome, which we talked about with the ascending tones, and that's very much so obviously the first track. And then if you listen carefully, the end of that track actually has a bit of the singing bowl in it.
It does?
Yeah, it's got about 20 seconds low.
From that piece?
It's the same, but I mean, yeah, it would be the same. It would be the same audio. Yeah, because I was trying to figure out whether it could flow into that. And then again, I tested the early version of the album, which had that as the second track. So you go from Welcome into Singing Bowl into Tios, and for some reason, I think because that track Welcome is it's a very light energy, and for me, it's very much DMT. It's the DMT blast. That's my direct channeling of my DMT experiences. And the Singing Bowl one, after that, it felt like I'd been lifted off into the celestial heavens and then suddenly plunged into the bowels of the earth. It was like, and I was I was again a strong dose, and I was kind of like being ground in this bowl in the ground. It was just like it felt healing, like as I got to because you know how the track kind of lightens towards the end, and the main drones, the main singing bowl drones kind of fade away, and it gets a little gentler, but the main chunk of it, when framed in a very different context with a very light beginning, was grueling. Like it was, and I'm not against grueling. Obviously, there's
we know.
There's a bit
we know. We're aware.
In the bowl.
We're aware.
There's plenty of gruel for everyone.
Enough gruel to go around, everyone. If you're
slopping out some spiritual gruel for you, but like this, it was too much, and it made the album 85 minutes long, which presents various other problems. And I wouldn't have been worried about that if it had worked, but basically I cut it and figured out a bridge between that and Tios, and then it became itself. Then it became an album.
Yeah.
So, but also you mentioned earlier about how the appearance of that track was synchronous with you starting to explore with ketamine yourself. And I don't know why exactly how this happened, but I finished the piece, and I hadn't been in touch with you for a while. We'd all been going through pandemic, and we'd met like 2 years ago, I think, and I hadn't been in touch much. And then I was just like, I have to send this to Aubrey for some reason. And I emailed it to you, and you like straight away, you listened to it on ketamine. I was like, okay, that was clearly supposed to happen.
Yeah,
So
I mean, prior to that, I was fumbling around with different tracks, and it was like, this one kind of works. This Dispenza meditation kind of works, but why does he change his voice like that? I just, like I'll think all these things, but that kind of worked. And like I'd have all of these things that were like kind of worked in this thing, and then that one dropped in. And it was a very important time for me because that's when I was transitioning. I had gotten habituated to using Xanax to fall asleep. So I was conditioned to do that. And I was going through with my partnership with Vailana and some of her healing work. I transitioned from that. And ketamine was a huge ally in that process because even if I wasn't sleeping, I could have a journey, put on that track, and then I could get into those kind of deep theta delta recovery cycles. So even if I was sleeping 4 hours a night, which was happening, I could jump into that journey with ketamine, and I could feel restored and human, and my heart and mind and spirit would get aligned. So not only was it something that was interesting and magical, which it really, really was. It was the first time I'd found sound mixed with the medicine where energy was moving to different parts of my body. Like the way that the drone would like, and I was like, whoa, it's going to my feet. Yeah. Like, wow, it's going. And then all of a sudden, like, and I'm upside down now. I'm upside down completely now. But nonetheless, like I was so deep in it that it was really incredibly restorative for my health. And we've been talking about ketamine for the psycho-spiritual journeying effects, which is incredibly powerful. And I've had a lot of manifestation, spiritual downloads, but it was legalized for the function of a person's health. And really that was a deep part of that process as well. So whatever was guiding you to make it also was guiding you to send it, or maybe it was my soul like, hey man, like please, this like the Aubrey guy needs this, like really needs this.
And I don't often do that. I don't just send unreleased things to people I've met once. Right. I'm just like, I'm gonna do it, and I sent it to maybe 2 or 3 other people. But and it's interesting because on its own, that piece is supposed to stand alone. It didn't blend into anything else, but it could be really nice as a bridging thing. I can.
Yeah, I mean, and I just want to go back to the title though. I think it's really, really important that you called it what you did, because think about it. If it was another title, just like another album with just a name, it would we might not be having this conversation in a sense, because it goes, people could miss its potential as a tool. It is, of course, it's great music. Of course, you can use it off label, and people will, and that's fantastic. But it's the people who want to use it on label wouldn't necessarily know. And now people who might not even know you are going to learn about this in this burgeoning field that's growing so quickly. And because there aren't many tools out there, as you said, and very few with a singular artistic voice, especially very few that are of, such ilk as yours and so crafted so well. So I thought that was a bold move, and I certainly had done it myself. So I was like, I'm so glad you did, but I wanted to just honor that you did that, because it's kind of would have been easier not to. Yeah,
and there were some people trying to persuade me not to. But,
I would imagine so.
They all changed their mind, though, I have to say. In fact, the record label were amazing. They were like, no, that's great.
Were they really?
Yeah. I mean, they're
so
a cool
awesome.
record label. Domino were cool. They were
Good
like,
sign for the times.
They're the best. Domino's the best.
Yeah, it was a great thing. So I'm now completely comfortable with that. But I think it was also really just, you've often talked on this podcast, which I listen to, by the way, about how you often you'll talk about things because you're giving a talk to yourself almost, right?
Pretty much always.
Pretty much all the time.
This is the deep secret. The deep Aubrey secret is that every product I've created is something for me, and every talk I give is something that's going to help. And it's, of course, I'm thinking of other people too, but it's because I need it, and I recognize my state of inner being with everybody else. If I need it, everybody needs it, and if they need it, I need it. You know, like we're so less separate than we believe we are. So, I know that if I'm serving myself in a deep way, it's going to serve people. Otherwise, I'm just guessing. I'm like, well, this doesn't really work for me, but I think it's going to work for them. How the fuck do I know?
Exactly. And if you make music like that, it's terrible.
Nail.
People can see through it. And people, non-musical people who don't even listen that deeply, they will still, it just doesn't resonate. Authenticity you can detect on different levels. But basically, this stuff is all my way of living, my way of understanding the world, and tools that I need. And I found that the music didn't exist that was perfect for my ketamine experience. There was playlists of different people, but I needed to make it to hear it myself. And it's quite weird to say this publicly, but the first experiences I had when it was finished were just so amazing. And it sounds like I'm just bigging up my album, but it didn't sound anything like it had come from me. And I had no idea where, it was like, this is the plants. Because even though ketamine's taking me there, it's, I had 5 years of regular DMT experiences, which, I now realize, because I've now stopped doing that, and I've now realized that I don't have to do that anymore, because the point of that was that energy was trying to get into this music, and that energy was trying to come out into the world. And it leads me to quite a cool story, which I'll share. So my probably best friend in the world is a guy called Dan, and he plays some of the synths on the album, some of the more generative, unusual, esoteric sounds on Welcome and a couple of other tracks. And we shared DMT experiences since 2015. We discovered it together, and I first heard of it in 2001, and I thought that's something I will never be ready to do. And after 15 years of meditating, I was ready to do it, and dived in deep. And we've all had that experience here, I guess. But fucking hell, it's still processing the first one, let alone the following. And
just to be clear, these experiences are NN-DMT experiences, not
pure 15-minute, crystal type thing. And obviously it goes without saying, I don't recommend it. I don't not recommend it, but
that's the only place. That's the only place
Take
to
it
be.
as you
Right?
Right? I'm just gonna say that. But anyway, the first one I had was literally heaven. I just went straight to the deepest, safest, most perfect love God ever that I could ever and have ever experienced since. Like nothing has ever been like that. And I like to look back at this and try and figure out the patterns and the meanings behind these trips. But that first one was like a kind of, you need to come in here. What's going to come next is really important. And of course, they got harder and harder. And maybe my fear increased, I don't know, but it was all from the mimosa bark. And it started to seem to me like it was the mimosa spirit that was interacting with me and with Dan on each occasion. We would see the same kind of things, and she was this extraordinary geometric fractal goddess that's like in you and becomes you, and you know how it is, that kind of stuff.
I don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is. No, exactly. The words don't work there.
And describing it is an interesting task.
The colors, we've managed to capture some of the colors outside, but they're never as vivid. But anyway, so I had increasingly scary experiences. They were never, I was never confronted with anything hostile, but I just got more and more scared of each one. But Dan, my friend, is more bold and would go for a heavier dose, and he'd had many on his own as well, and he would often get these very clear messages. He'd come out with like, okay, you must, he works on the land, he has a small holding farm, and he looks after his family, and lives quite off grid, and he would get quite clear messages about things to do in his life. I would just get these goddess investigations, and I'd be filled with music, and obviously that was the purpose, but I wasn't like, oh, this is how you resolve this relationship. It didn't provide me with way too out there for that. But anyway, so one time we were doing it together, and he would always go first because he was, again, bolder, and he'd had many experiences by this point, and so he describes this as he took the dose, maybe 30 milligrams, something like that. It's quite high, I think. And then, as usual, the goddess comes towards him, and then she goes, "This guy," pointing at me. So this is not for you today. You've got to help this guy get this music out here.
Wow.
So it just literally comes with and just turns, just takes a swerve and points at me. And he's like, after when he recovered, he was like, that was interesting. She didn't want to talk to me today. She was like, it was a very, very clear message that he had to help me in, we don't know exactly what ways. And now I can look back, and I thought it was to do with singularity in my previous album, which definitely has a strong DMT influence. But now I realize it was entirely about this one. And the way in which he helped me was he provided some of the sounds, but also the love and the support and the confidence to make what is an unusual album, but also, the support through the DMT, through helping me and sitting with me through those increasingly scary experiences. And then one day when I was done with it, that's when the album suddenly got written, and I look back and it's like, that was school. I was in school to make this record.
Yeah.
But it's so cool to think that happened in that way.
We have so much more help, seen and unseen, than we recognize. And this is the thing that I can attest to over and over again. It's that we think we might be alone. We think that the odds are against us. It's all daunting, but we're not taking into account this gigantic synchronous support from the universe, whatever you want to call it, whatever your cosmology and whatever your paradigm allows you to name it and nomenclature, it doesn't matter, but we're supported in some very deep ways. And I'm sure we all could recount countless stories, as yours was, of key moments where it's like, well, I got helped. I got helped a lot. And there's the humility to that, which is like, this isn't all me. Hardly. I don't know how much of it is me, actually, because every time I really take a clear look, it's like, I got so much support and so much help in this process. And sure, I made some choices, and I'll give myself some credit, but it was like, we're really, really guided.
Yeah, and I feel like in that, recounting that particular story, it's important for me to point out that I didn't then start to consider myself as a sort of unique or special person. I could do this. It wasn't so much that. It was a combination of the fact that I had an audience and that I'm having these experiences, and I, through my interest in psychedelics, I'd met all the people that could perhaps help this get out. And, it was like, it always goes back to that thing of being a channel rather than,
yes,
anything
and
else.
Your mastery of being able to create sound and create music was like, a lot of people might have that urge, but unless they've cultivated the 10,000 plus hours of being able to translate that into something at the level that you're able to, they can try their best. And that's all really important, and it's all super valuable. But the skill sets that you have then allow you to translate that into something else. So it's not like this pure, your mind goes blank and you just channel something. And I didn't even know what levers I was pushing, and I didn't even know the software, but the guides told me how to use the software. It doesn't work like that.
Oh yeah, I knew the software.
Like if you're going to write something, you need the vocabulary.
Yeah.
If you're like, when things come through me, they come through words. But my deep practice with words and poetry and writing has allowed me so that I can take the energy. It always comes with an energy, and I'll get the energy, and then I'll know the words will just flow they'll flow right out because I feel the energy of it, and that's the gift.
Yeah.
And then my own like whole holding of my intellect, everything that I've accumulated, then just translates that in a way that actually, crystallizes it in the 3D.
Yeah, and it's interesting because for me, when you talk about those 10,000 hours, like for me, the desire to get as good as I can at sound design and creating sounds and dimensional music in particular, which is what I describe this as, comes from, well, the fuel for that in the early years was all the ego. It was like, I had, like many people, probably everyone had a rough time at school and, it wasn't at the right place perhaps, and had a desire to be cool, had a desire to be popular, wanted money, wanted a career, and also passionately loved and lived and breathed music. So the two things work together. But the amount of hours I spent, many of them in like living in my mum's house in her attic, just learning how to make all this stuff with no training, just time and failing. And it's almost like you have to learn how to control that totally before you can learn how to let go of it almost. Because this album, yeah, I know all the software, but really it was about letting go of the control of the music. It's quite hard to explain this, but there's no grid on any of the tracks. So there's no tempo, there's no marker points, there's no rhythms. But instead of that, there's the things that landed where they were supposed to land. It's quite hard to explain, but like one example is there's this track called Love Flows Over Us in Prismatic Waves. I don't like saying these titles out loud because they're supposed to be read, but I've said it. It's on the album. I like the titles, they're just very like, that is what it is when I hear it. That's what it is. So that's what I have to call it. The policy is total honesty with this one. But I had this kind of drone sound going, and it was something that was playable. It was based on the Unicorder sample, which is a Nils from. Yep. But it's a beautiful piano thing, but processed beyond recognition, so you would never know that, which is my policy on
the Destructo machine.
Yeah. So I was playing this sound, and it was like, I was finding it really beautiful, but it's like, it's a little bit electronic. It doesn't have, and I was drinking a beer, and beer was an important medicine, interestingly, in the making of this album, because this was, let's remember, this was like mid-pandemic, midwinter, everything's shut. I was also going through a real heartbreak, and I found about 6 o'clock, if I were to bring beer into the mix, I would get 3-4 more hours of some of the best stuff happened. It may not be ideal for my body, but fuck it, this is delicious.
Fuck yeah.
Delicious, like, nice beers are not,
well,
whatever.
That makes all the difference.
It does actually.
Then it's okay.
It doesn't have any extra shit in, but whatever. You don't need to get into the ingredients.
And also the energetics of the love that's poured into a certain thing.
Yeah.
Like we're making energy music.
Yeah.
Like the energetics of what you're ingesting count. In a certain way.
Yeah. So I would get this boost and euphoria that would just kind of keep me going. And all that felt important in that era, it's an unforgettable era in so many ways, but all that felt important was to keep going. So I didn't look after myself as well as I should, but it didn't feel like it mattered. And looking back, I wouldn't change it. But the reason I mention it is because I always drink it out of a glass. I like the vessel to be right with all drinks. I don't know if you have like your favorite coffee mug. I mean, it's not a rare thing, but it's very important to me to have this nice glass. So I had my studio in the, pour the beer, listening to this drone sound, thinking it needed a bit of life, and I just happened to flick the beer glass, and it was the exact note that was missing from the chord. And had I had one more sip before flicking it, it would have been like, I don't know. But because it was perfect, I just grabbed a mic immediately and just like... And if you play that track, you can hear it really clearly. It happens within the first 2 minutes of that track. It's all just, and then I put it across the keyboard. So the great thing on the software I use is you can map a sound across the keyboard very easily. So I could then play that beer note on a different key, and the whole thing just came from the level the liquid was at the time. And so that's just one. There's millions of examples of that happening across the album. But if you're just open to that, like what is going on in the room, what is going on outside the building, like sometimes you'll capture a bird going past or whatever, but it's generally supposed to be on there for me anyway. Yeah. And that was such a personal, tiny, trivial little thing, but it's one of my favorite sounds on the album.
I want to go back to a philosophical point and that you were making about the ego, because I think this is important to touch on. A lot of people denigrate the ego. right? As if it's a bad thing, as if this is like something that's just here to be transcended, and like it has no value, and it's always the enemy. I mean, there's even a book, Ego is the Enemy, right? And I don't particularly like that title or that premise, because I think it is a very powerful and important and useful tool, more useful at certain times than others. Like, without your ego in the start of your journey, would you have become the musician that you are now, that's capable now of stepping aside from the ego? You don't eradicate it, but stepping aside and creating something even more beautiful. No. Exactly. You could try to step aside, but you wouldn't have had the skills and the dedication, that fiery determination to get there. Same with me, like I needed my ego as this fuel source to get me to the place where I am now, where now I have the ability to occasionally, if I'm in grace, can step aside and transcend it. But it's this very important fuel source. And I'd open that up to you as well, your own journey with how your ego has been an ally. So the opposite of ego is the enemy. Ego is an ally. And here's where it also has its faults, but here's the ego as an ally.
The fire metaphor is a good one, because it is a fuel. And if we honor the fact that it's a kind of the engine that keeps us moving forward, there's probably a reason why we have these predilections in our personalities, growing up. And it's so you honor that. It's like part of the thing that keeps burning the engine in a way. And I think about the line, sit around the fire, and it gets even deeper for me. Like ego is part of that fire. Like you're burning through the ego itself, but that's also like in some ways, like the recognition of it is the burning of it, but then that creates the fuel to like create. And creation is sort of the essence of why we're here, and all the forms that we do it, not just beautiful albums, but all the things we do is like, that is God seeing God. We are creating with every moment. And so in that sense, I had that revelation on my first ayahuasca experience, and it's in that song Grandmother's Fear that I released a long time ago, where at the end it says, for the ego to be teammates and as opposed to enemy. That's something I felt, like my ego is swimming around me in the journey, and sometimes it would like grab me and I'd go on this journey, and then 30 minutes later be like, oh man, I was just all wrapped up in that. Let me get back to there it is again. And it was like this masterful skill where it could really pull me away. But I was like, I don't want to push you away. I want to be a teammate with you. And I can have these cosmic feelings and revelations at the same time that the ego helps me be on this earth and make decisions and be discursive. And that's important. And so I want to work together in that way. But maybe in some way when we witness it, as Ram Dass would say, and we kind of watch that show going by, then suddenly we're able to use the ego as a tool. It's almost, maybe it's like a linebacker, or it's something, or it's like a log we put on the fire, and it's not being destroyed, but it's creating more heat.
What's a linebacker?
What's a linebacker? Football.
A tenacious defensive player on the football field. They
looks like Justin Wren or all these guys basically that were around.
Bigger than me, but more
not like me then.
Not like they're like a wide receiver type of vibe.
That sounds like a nice job.
Yeah, no, it's such an important point. I mean, there's a reason why we have an ego. It's to separate us so that we can be a different articulation. Without the one that says, I am not everything, we collapse back into unicity again anyways. It's this important way that allows us free will. It allows us all these things, but the skill to be able to use it in a productive way rather than in a destructive way. And that requires, in order to be able to master that to that level, it requires a level of separation. You have to be able to witness the ego, and then to witness the ego, you have to have some foothold in an identity that's beyond it. And, that's what all the great mystical teachings are about.
You need practice.
You need practice. Yeah. And I see this going more, because the concept is like, makes sense. Okay, witness the ego. But to really go through, this was happening last night in the journey as well, different ways in which I was wondering, oh man, did I say that wrong thing? And was that weird? I forgot to tell people to be quiet in the middle of the thing between oh man. And I would go in and I was like, stop, it's all right. Like, and I would watch these different aspects. And that skill, the more you practice it, as you're alluding to, the more you practice it, the better you are at it. so that you can just watch it softly rather than getting engaged and sucked into it. That's where the challenge becomes, is when we become the ego without any awareness that there's anything that exists beyond it. Then we're in trouble. But if we can use it as a teammate, not exactly the same thing, then we're like, all right, I see you, buddy. Like, I see what you're there, and I understand. I hear you. And I don't disagree, but we're going to go this way. That's really sovereignty.
I like to think of it as parenting a child almost. It doesn't know better. Like, yeah, sometimes in this metaphor I'm creating, which might not work, the child is in charge of the car. But sometimes it's,
how entitled is the child? Yeah, I don't know.
Exactly. But sometimes you just need to go, you know what, I'm gonna step in here, because I had an interesting example of that this morning. So we went to Justin Wren's place and had an ice bath. It's amazing, one of my favorite things to do, and felt absolutely blissful afterwards. And I needed it because I drank a load of beer last night to calm down after the show, and I felt obviously cleansed and brilliant. And then I don't look at Instagram very often, but for some reason I went and looked, and I saw that I'd had to postpone all my European tour because of COVID stuff. It's impossible to freely travel around right now. And someone was really angry about me postponing the Oslo show, and I just saw this comment, and I was immediately thrown into that. But it wasn't my fault. And he was like, "Why couldn't you just come out for this? We don't have restrictions here." They're not understanding the mechanics of trying to move 8 people around in this time. And it took me maybe 3 minutes. It's good. The time was reduced a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I think that's because I just got out of the ice bath and I was surrounded by new friends, and I was in it was a beautiful sunny day, and there are many good things. But I fully went in there for a minute. I was like, "What am I going to?" And it still gets you, and it's always as intense for me anyway. It's just hopefully the duration of effect reduces over time. So yeah. And I realize that will never not be the case.
Just got to stay out of the comments, man. That is.
I do in general. That's the thing. It's really not something I would ever do. But I think I don't know. Whatever.
I feel you. I mean, I've been there for sure. It's longer than 3 minutes.
Everybody has, and certain ones bite a little harder.
They do. They do if they're not fair, I guess. And then
the injustice then becomes a trigger of it, and or some slight agreement that you have with it, a little bit of guilt. It has to kind of agree with something, and
the
that's
elements
I think
of truth. Yeah,
yeah. So that's really the case with. And people worry about this in a lot of shamanic circles as well. Like there's these movies where there'll be some demonic possession, where some demon will just come out of the blue and attach itself and possess somebody. But you really talk to the great masters and they're like, no. Like there has to be resonance. There has to be resonance in the individual for a dark energy to stick. And some of the great masters that I've worked with, they have no concern at all. I'm like, well, you're breathing in this energy. Like Maestro Orlando, for example, he blows in his soplato, in his healings, he'll blow in, or benteado, he'll blow in tobacco or cinnamon, and then he'll immediately go and like suck it up. I think it's called chupar, but chupar is a little more specific, but he sucks up the energy, and then he'll, cough or like vomit or whatever, or like purge or burp or whatever. And he just goes through this process. And I got to talk to him. I'm like, well, why? Aren't you, what do you do about, are you worried about any of the energy sticking to you? He's like, no. Like I'm taking it immediately because I know that there's no resonance for that energy in me at all. So while I can take it and then move it, it's not going to stick. Like it just won't stick. Same with the 5-MeO Bufo shamans. It won't stick to me at all because there's no part of me that agrees with that energy that exists. Like that's the thing that it could collect in. And I think that's the same way with, when we're talking about the energy that we might get from one of these comments. Like if we have a little bit of agreement to it, a little bit of our own self-judgment, a little bit of our own self-hate, a little bit of our own guilt, then all of a sudden there's resonance, and that thing's going to stick a lot longer and maybe add another pebble to our self-judgment recrimination pile. But if we've done that internal work, it's like, oh, whatever. And just move past it. There's no resonance.
You got to have time of reflection to balance out the ego in a sense. It's all just like the yin yang of it. And so if most of what we do in our lives these days is feeding our egoic identity. And so when you are on social media a lot and really in the weeds of the comments, you're just in that world where it's just all about essentially ego. And we're not,
and no consequence for the person that's written it.
Right.
Either.
So you have to do things that feed the other side.
The consequence, I think, is felt deeply.
You're right.
Underneath the surface, the interbeing is unavoidable, right? The fact that if you do something to someone else, you're doing it to you is a universal law. They just might not feel it because it's not in their awareness. But every time you do something hurtful to another person, you're hurting yourself. You cannot escape it. Karma is instant. It's not something that happens later. I think this is another misnomer. Like, no, it's instant. It's just on the subtle body that you can't feel. But don't worry, it'll be there. It'll be there for you to deal with when you're done.
It's about being cognizant of your word in all shapes and forms, just for the power of it as a matter of leading your life and the effect it has on you.
Yeah, in general, it's a thing I just don't engage with, and I do very little posting, and it's just, I've been lucky to be able to avoid it overall. So I don't think it's necessarily inherently a bad thing at all, but I know that I'm too sensitive to take it. It would get in my way of doing something useful. And if I can, as long as I can, persuade people to listen to my stuff somehow and come to the shows, then I don't need to engage with something that I don't inherit. I think is not necessarily a general force for good, but
so let's try on this idea. It's not something that I have a lot of practice in, but just thinking about it. Just as with the ice bath, it's going to be cold, and that hormetic stressor is going to create an adaptation that's positive. That's going to make you stronger. A lot of times we look at the comments without any intention, hoping that they're positive. So maybe kind of looking for the negative one.
You skim through the
and
positives.
Surprise.
We all do that.
Yeah.
They're all good, and then you find the one asshole.
Yeah, of course. So we do that, but we don't do it with any kind of ceremonial intent. Now, I would suppose, just from thinking about it, that if you went into that, had a centering, much like Radha did for us prior to us getting on this podcast, an intentional centering practice where you're saying, I'm going in and I'm going into this energy, and I'm going to make myself, impervious in a way by feeling this and knowing that I'm strong enough to transmute it, and watching the way that my ego reacts, and use it as the iron that's sharpening your iron, using it as that force. I think you could potentially make real productive work out of doing it, but that's the difference between doing something unconsciously and doing something with full conscious intent. And I haven't tried that, but I would, and anybody listening who finds that curious, try that like it's an ice bath. Like, I'm going to go in for my ego ice bath, and it's going to be gnarly, but we're going to try that on, and I'm going to see how quickly I can move that into love and self-forgiveness and compassion for that other person. How deeply can I do that? It's very similar to what, people will put someone that they have the hardest time loving on their altar. Ram Dass did that with Trump. Other people have done that with a variety of different people. Yeah. It's like, okay, now this is the next level. It's easy to put, Maharaji on my altar. I love him infinitely and unconditionally. It's instant. What about this guy?
This is like an ice bath full of trolls, basically.
Exactly.
To get in there with them and just be like, how long can I stick around? Just breathe through it.
Yeah. Quite an image as well.
Yeah.
You talking like those tiny trolls?
But the ones with the hair.
Those guys are cool.
That's what internet trolls look like, I assume.
That's maybe another thing.
I need one of those in my altar.
Yeah. I want to switch gears here real quick. I want to talk about your metaphysical feelings about looking at a human being as a vibrational, energetic being. Because as we know, everything is both wave and particle simultaneously. So there is, of course, density. And perhaps that's because we're observing ourselves more in the particle standpoint than we are in the wave standpoint. Whatever, it feels very real to me. If I pound it on the table, it's certainly very particle-y. However, we also know that it can be expressed as a wave. And that's why when we say we're energetic beings, we're also paradoxically saying the truth because of the nature of the quantum. It is a yes and situation. Music is wave, not particle. So the music is interacting with the part of us, potentially, and I just want to understand from your standpoint, a part of us that could be expressed as waves. And that's perhaps one of the ways that musically it's such a magical experience to engage with music. As people who are creating these experiences in, truly the most profound ways. I mean, I'd add maybe a couple other people at this table of conversation, Porangi, Justin Beretta, David Block, like a couple people that I'm like, fuck you guys too, and maybe we'll all get a Wizards Council together and at some point. And
Caitlin Aurelia Smith, you should check her stuff.
All right.
Check
I'm sure there's more. I'm sure there's more.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah.
So, but anyways, getting this idea of like, what is what is the potential of not only using sound, and have you spent much time thinking about this element of like what is happening from a metaphysical standpoint when you're making this music?
Well, I would be fascinated to know. I mean, I operate generally on a kind of on the David Lynch principle of not really thinking about what you're doing, just letting it happen. But I like to retrospectively analyze and try and work out what's going on. But I think when you bring the particular medicine of ketamine into it, in my experiences listening to this album as it was finished, were experience of becoming pure wave, pure light, pure being. But the I suppose the music was like a sort of vessel. You know, we've all had that experience where we just don't have our bodies anymore and we are only the music. So I would love to know what's actually going on there, or whether there's even, perhaps you have the answers to this.
Well, we both largely are in the realm of instrumental music for all intents and purpose, and for mostly lyricless. I mean, you know what I mean? So, and I think there's something that I find really interesting about just the way music can be trans-dimensional, and it kind of builds bridges between different spaces and feelings, and it goes straight to creating emotion. And I think I said this before, but
an emotion is also wave, not particle, right?
It's like
what is emotion?
Like what is love, for instance, and the fact that music helps engender all these different feelings, and you can kind of like as a recipe, just like in a film score, create different emotional states with music, and it's really good at it. And it's a human condition, because if you have the PhD in music or you're someone who knows nothing about music, you both will respond to the same piece of music the same way. Emotionally, you just naturally have this response to music. It's something baked into what it means to be human. And so I really like when you stick with instrumental spaces, largely it's almost like it gives more room for interpretation. It's more in the myth and the metaphor. And when you get into psychedelic spaces, I feel like that's even more important, because that's all that space is. It's the ineffable in between, this liminal space, and the music has this ability that I also don't fully understand, but it's so clear that it's able to, it's a kind of magic almost, you know, how it works.
It is actual magic. And I suppose hearing us talk about this, I'm thinking I would love to hear like a shamanic perspective on how this kind of, this modern music is affecting the energetic body, you know. I would love
like
to
all
play
music essentially that's been happening.
Well, no, I mean specifically like electronic-based psychedelic music, which I personally think has just, you know, it's just such a profoundly. It just feels like there's just such potential. You know, that thing I was saying last night about the ability to build a universe and then enter inside of it. But what is actually going on? And I'm sure there, you know, I would love to hear from the traditional point of view what is actually happening.
Yeah, that's a
what
great.
They would what a trained shaman would think of hearing that.
That's a great point, because you know, right behind me there is a Shipibo painting, and all of that art that you see, that is music translated to a visual representation. They're actually
their sheet music,
that's their sheet music of their icaros, you know, and that's what it appears to them. So they're seeing it in a certain way, and one commonality is there's this kind of nasal way in which they all sing their icaros in a very particular, and they're just tapped into that frequency of that plant. You go to an Mboga shaman, again, on the other side of the wall, the Bwiti, it's, you know, mouth harps and these different things that are very fast paced, working with the energy of that. And then it would be very interesting to hear their perspective, but I would imagine that it's something that they would just feel. And what we would probably get out of, you know, a conversation with Maestro Orlando after listening to one of your albums was like a nod, like, that would be like,
I'll take that.
There's a cultural relevance to it too, and I think like it's meant to come from the culture we're in, so it can speak to the culture at large. And I think that's what's really interesting, is like this pairing that's happening between technology, the tools we have to make music now, and really this idea of the psychedelic space, and that is new. And I think what's missing and what's needed is music that speaks sort of like a new Western shamanic tradition. Yeah. Not that's ignoring, it's actually like honoring everything we know, but we kind of need these tools to speak to the average person in America who just read Michael Pollan's book and is like, I'm interested in this stuff. I want to do this, but I don't really know how. And we know that the music part of that is going to be a really central piece to the journey itself, not discounting the preparation, the integration, that sort of stuff. And so I think we need some tools that like speak a musical language that's familiar to us. And we're like, oh, okay. Electronic music is somewhat familiar to us, and just chordal structures, and you know what I mean? For some people, like a rattle or something, although that might work just fine, it could be kind of intense for them. It's so unfamiliar, you know?
Well, tonight, it's interesting that we're having this conversation, because tonight you guys are going to get an opportunity to lay on this thing called the Opus bed, which is a full conceptual haptic bed. And this is like the first prototype, and it's unbelievable. I mean, it is like, so you lay down on this full haptic bed, and for people who don't know haptic bed, it has all of these inducers, whatever the things that make the bass, the vibrational sound. It translates
the bass into vibrations. You
translate the bass into vibrations that you feel.
Okay.
And there are all these different panels, so you can move it up and down the whole bed, and it's incredibly strong. And then you have a weighted blanket over the top of it. So you have a weighted blanket on this haptic bed, and you're blindfold, and they're creating these, taking music and then translating, and they're just kind of figuring it out like this, but it's a new medium of a way that you can feel music in a different way, which is what was happening in the giant building we were in with the reverberation of everything and the size of the speakers. But how the hell do you do that at home, you know? Very difficult to find one of these things. They're not that common right now, but this is like an interesting thing. So I can't wait for you guys to get on it tonight, you know, go through some of these tracks and feel like, okay, now what about this technology layered with, you know, what you guys are being able to do? And of course, like, get your own bed and then be able to like get into the interface. And if you want to, you know, obviously no pressure or anything, do whatever the fuck you want. You guys are doing incredible things, but it's just like another thing that's unlocking, which to me has like amazing potential for both breath work, for journeys, for just meditation, because there's something so comforting about that vibration. You know, Dr. Dave Rabin, who's one of the leading ketamine specialists in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, he has a watch called the Apollo watch, you know, and Rada, you're probably familiar with the Apollo, but it sends these like kind of like different pulsing vibrations on your arm. So if you feel really terrified of the dissociative nature of going into the void, like, oh my God, I'm going into the void. Where am I? Am I still around? Is this nice, warm, like pulsing thing on your wrist. Like, hey, it's okay.
Interesting.
It's okay, babe. It's like, it's
holding your hand.
It's holding your hand. And this thing is like holding your whole body. It's like all of a sudden you're just supported. You're like, oh yeah, thank you. Like, all right, I'm here. And it's very interesting. And I think this is where technology is blending both the technology that you guys are using to create the music, but then actually the playback of the music is becoming an interesting technology through these like haptic channels. So I can't wait to, you know, have two masters like yourself get on these.
Do you do this together at the same time, or is this like
there's no queen size. There's no queen size.
Exactly.
You can cuddle.
Am I on? Yeah. Where's this weighted blanket in this picture?
You can cuddle. It's the cheese, and you guys are the buns on your grilled cheese sandwich.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, it's just very cool to really think about the ways in which these technologies are available. And of course, the didgeridoo, people think, oh yeah, it's a wonderful instrument to play to the people. No, that's not the point of the didge. The point is that it plays you. The didge plays you. It plays your head. It plays your body. They're playing to get themselves in a trance, using their self as an instrument.
That's cool.
Right? Like that's the point of that instrument. It just happens to sound cool for other people.
That's such a space
I didn't
instrument.
know that.
Oh my God.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So this is like sound, and of course chanting, like oming, like, yeah, om makes a cool sound. We always think of like the sounds we make, like, yeah, that's good for the world who's hearing the om. No, it's for you. You're making an om because it hits you right in the chest. That's what like awakens that heart chakra, and all these different tones. They're for us. They're like medicine for us to straighten out all of these different things. So to blend that intelligence with technology, with everything, like this is part of this new world of all of the tools that we need to shake ourselves out of the prisons that we're in.
Yeah, I concur. And it's hard to know like the technological things, like, you know, wearable tech that maybe we could use to read biofeedback, and maybe that makes dynamic music, and that stuff could work, and it's all interesting. And sometimes you think like the thing that's tapping your arm to remind you that you're still in space in a way. There's nothing more powerful than like just a good facilitator knowing when to put their hand on your heart.
Totally.
And there's nothing that can beat that in a way.
Totally.
Or there's nothing that can just beat like just being in a forest and just like hearing those natural sounds and just being with it versus anything we could create, sometimes.
I was imagining like a sort of creepy robot arm coming over.
You are stressed. You are stressed.
We'll relax you.
There's speaking of that, I'm actually working with an ayahuasca shaman who's also a composer and like visual artist, and we have this idea working with this different VR company he wants to create like a virtual ceremony with like the music and things, but if you combine it with a wearable, your own like heart resonance, your own like your pulse, if you get anxious or whatever, could actually change the nature of what's being fed in real time.
Yeah.
So you're really like interacting in a similar way, just visually, no medicine at all necessary, but interacting with the vision space and sound space in a way that is very much like a journey. So in a journey, that's what's happening. Our own anxiousness, our own fears, our own thoughts, they manifest in the visions that we see, in the quality of the thing that we get. So there's this interesting feedback loop of working through that. You take that deep sigh of surrender and acceptance, and all of a sudden your skulls turn to butterflies, and you're like, oh man, I wish I'd have thought of that like 10 minutes ago before I was in the wheat thresher of dead bodies. This is way nicer to move through this. And you start to learn like, okay, how do I navigate? Oh, find love even in the things that I'm scared of. And like to use technology in that way, could be really interesting and valuable. I'm excited about that as we move forward.
It's happening. There are a lot of projects going on exploring this stuff. So, and even spatial audio, like, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see where it goes.
Like the 8D, what are your thoughts on that? Like 8D spatial audio?
Yeah, so I'm definitely like, okay, so I was massively against the idea that like, there are so few companies that now control how all music is listened to. It's like two, I think. And I was so against the idea that they could just decide, okay, we're not going to, stereo is a thing of the past. You now have to think in how many channels is Atmos? I don't know, 12 or something.
I think it can be, yeah.
Yeah, however many, but it's a very different
Not
thing.
many people have that kind of system.
Well, no, and so that sort of brings me to the point that what they, instead of that, are just kind of bouncing down to a binaural simulation of listening to lots of speakers when you don't have lots of speakers. And that, for some people, could then replace the mastered, finished album that you made. And that, for me, was like terrifying because, like, if I wanted it to sound binaural, I would have made it sound binaural myself.
And 99.9% of people wouldn't understand the difference between any of this, but it just affects how they feel when they hear the music.
Yeah, and
is it landing how you want it to land?
And there's all these like talk of like remixing amazing classic tracks, and then say, okay, now we can put the vocalist in the middle, like he's in a room, and the band is playing around him, and it doesn't sound the same. And totally like, okay, that may be, it may have a place. But anyway, then I tried it on my album. And it was great. It's like, oh man! And I think because it's non-vocal and because it is dimensional, and this isn't going to make sense to people just listening, but it's like moving from speakers being here, but there. Suddenly the sounds, you're like right in the middle of the picture. And I think if they're able to roll out affordable versions of these systems, then it might encourage, particularly with this genre of music, which is the only genre I've sort of qualified to really speak about, it could encourage a more conscious form of music listening where listening to music is enough. Obviously there's a lot of people that do that, but there's a lot of people that don't do that, and they might be encouraged to have a place in their house where they sit in a chair and they really just listen, and music is the therapist. So having heard how good it can sound when done sensitively and carefully, and really it's just about moving things from here to here and here to here, and having like the trebles up moving around above you and the bass physically below you, all that stuff. There is something amazing in that, so I'm tentatively going to say I'm a fan of it.
Mm-hmm. When you guys look forward, you guys have made amazing contributions to everybody who's in the space and everybody in the future who will remember these albums and be able to go back to these. When you look forward to what's next, like what's coming up, I know it's super fresh for you. By the time this podcast releases, it'll be, the week of your release of of the album itself, and you just came out with In, which is stunning. We haven't give that
It'll
much.
be out at the end of October. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is all super fresh, and so I know I don't want to be too early to say, hey, well, what's next? You know, because you guys are still reveling in the creation of this. But when you're looking out from both what you want to have emerge from yourself and what you're feeling is the next need, just intuitively for the world from a musical standpoint, like, what do you guys both see from the projects that are going to come out of you here forward?
Jon.
Well, I got a feeling that this one is kind of turning me very radically down a different route. I do also feel like I've also returned to DJing a bit recently, which has not really been possible for the last year and a half. And so I've felt the urge to start making some rhythmic music again. But overall, I think my general direction feels very different now. And I guess it a little bit depends on how this goes down and what it brings in, because I think putting out something with such a clear intention, it will bring in certain things, and I need to see how I feel about what comes from it and whether I can handle it and whether it's, you know, nourishing for me as well. And ultimately I start to understand how to answer that question by sitting in the studio and making something, because definitely the highest intelligence I have is of that sort. It's definitely not in thinking ahead, you know, because my mind is too kind of, you know, when I'm not making music, it's a little skittish and jumps over subjects all the time. So I just think it will come through, sounds kind of cheesy, but it will come through the music. It will come through when I sit down and start playing something again, like I was saying last night, like how playing the piano centers me and puts me in that zone. It's become increasingly clear to me that that's my purpose here, and that I shouldn't, because I went through phases of like thinking, I need time off music, and then just to focus on health. And I put myself through a sort of boot camp of like doing insane amounts of Wim Hof breath work every morning and doing no music and just trying very hard to relax. It didn't work.
Wasn't that when we met though?
Yeah, I think I might have been
in some ways,
going
like,
through that. Yeah.
You said you were taking a sabbatical from music, and then I presented potentially this idea of doing this track.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, was your first thing you kind of started
No,
on.
the first thing was the Taos Caves piece.
True,
which
that
was
existed.
in June of last year. That existed. And my time off was, I can't remember whether it was before or after that, but it was happening around that period. And it just felt like, well, you know, I've been hammering at this for like 22 years, and I've done all these albums and, you know, so much stuff, and I've physically compromised myself through doing that, and I really need to recover. And I've been, you know, just touring itself, it's very hard to do in a healthy way, because, you know, if you've just got off a plane and it's like your levels of willpower and resistance to things that are going to help you feel better immediately are just lower than ever. They would already be low for me after a hard day of work, but if you add a flight to that and airport transfers, all the shit that comes with touring, you know, that drink is calling loudly. So I just needed a break from everything, and I just thought I just kind of threw music out for a bit, not very long, you know, and then yeah, this was the thing that something in my head just kind of said, remember those recordings from Ecuador? Remember you're supposed to write that piece? And then the album began actually from that kind of void of feeling like shit. I mean, a lot of musicians I know had a very similar experience of just stopping for a while, and some of them felt better. I definitely did not. And one of the intentions, just for my own well-being, is to learn how to just try and do it for pleasure a bit. Because this album, I thought maybe was going to be just a thing I did for pleasure, perhaps. But
that's why it's so good.
And it was, and in fact, it was incredibly pleasurable. But pleasure's not really the word, but nourishing, maybe.
Yeah,
I think that's probably a trap that a lot of artists get in. They know that their art comes from a deep place of suffering. You know, like I never write more poetry than when I'm completely heartbroken or like something intense is going on. Sometimes there's a beautiful inspiration that comes from an experience and things like that. But I think a lot of artists have that, where that well of energy then is able to be transmuted into art. And this is the process of alchemy, but you're starting with this pool of just fuel, of energy, of resources that if you channel it into whatever way that your mouth is formed to make that scream that allows it to release, whether it's words or music or art or painting or anything like that, you know that it's beautiful. And I think for an artist, it could be an easy trap to say like, well, I could really get myself into a really peaceful, equanimous place. But what happens to my art? You know, like what happens to the art at that point?
Yeah, but it's tricky because I haven't found a way to balance the two. I haven't found a way to balance looking after myself physically. Like I do a lot of healthy stuff. I do a lot of breath work and training and saunas and, you know, but I also do a lot of stuff that just I need to do to calm myself down after working. And I don't know how to, like the amount of energy that pours into that music, particularly the upbeat stuff, but actually turns out it was just the same with this album. It's just, I'm like wired like I've got a fucking electric cord right up there. And it's like, yeah, it's amazing, but what happens when it's 10 p.m. and, you know, what am I supposed to do now?
Sure.
And I haven't, well, even with all these techniques, I mean, I've been doing TM for 6 years. I can make myself feel, I can make my mood great. I can breathe myself happy. I can, but it isn't calming. The nervous system is so jacked up by music and also the world around and my sensitivity to the world around. I haven't learned that balance. So I guess what I was trying to do in that month was learn that balance, but I'm still, that seems to be the challenge that still faces me.
You and most of us.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
I mean, a lot of it is just the world, right? The way there's this, the level of stimulation, and you know, that's out there. Fasting, all forms of fasting has proven to help me, but yeah.
How about you?
I'm looking forward to, honestly, more. This collaboration has been extremely nourishing for me. I've done different collaborations over the years, but I'm looking forward to more of that because I learned so much. I mean, just seeing a different perspective. I learned so much, and it challenges like ideas I have musically and actually on all levels, like how to be an artist. And I want to do more of that. I'd be honored to do anything more with Jon forever. And it really has inspired me to think bigger about like what happens when what I do and what I bring to the table meets and is challenged by other ideas. And I want more of that because I think I can see now how it will better my offering. I think it's needed at this point in time for me, and I'm looking forward to those opportunities. So that's what excites me, is like what sort of just occurred and how we both kind of got out of the way so much and just sort of just all happened. It's like, that's so awesome. And then on top of that, it's like, you know, I got to see so many things I never would have seen before, or realized about my own work. Just seeing, I mean, I can't tell you what a dream it is. Like I've been a fan of Jon for a long time, and you know, and to call him a friend is I'm ecstatic about it. But to send, when Jon said, you know, we say, hey, let's do this Ram Dass track, sounds good. And he says, why don't you start something and send it my way and I'll take over. I'm like, no problem. I hang up the phone. I'm like, holy shit, I have to make a song. And I thought to myself, the way I have to do this is like every song. It's like, don't think about it. Just make noise and recognize whatever you're going to send him is not going to be like some perfect, amazing piece. It needs to just be step one. And I knew he knew that. And so it was like getting out of the way of things like that. And then to have you take those things I had made and watch you do your thing, you get to see like a different perspective on your own ideas. And like, I never thought of that. Why haven't I ever thought of that? That's such a great idea musically. And now that's just a new color in your palette of inspiration. And so that's really, really exciting to me. The other thing I'm excited about is in the psychedelic therapy space with music is this idea of access. And I'm really interested in how we can bring these tools and experiences to people who maybe wouldn't normally be able to do this, whether it's for economic reasons, social justice reasons, or a variety of reasons. And so we have a project we're working on called Journey Space that's about online facilitated journeys with music. And you do them in groups online. The cost can go way down. And we're working through sort of the spirit tip of the legality of it, but I think there's a way to do it. And so we're launching this platform and cultivating musicians to say, hey, you could guide a journey from start to finish. And so we're also building more musicians to kind of create in that space and sort of cultivate that style of music. And then hopefully also give access for people to come on a platform like Journey Space and maybe have an experience that's safer, that they're probably going to do anyway, but it's probably better if there's someone there to help.
Yeah.
that's a good kind of general point, I think, on this. They're going to do it anyway, but it's better to have some help.
And these music tools are, I think, awesome helps. And a lot of people don't even know that will help them until they get into this space. And
I mean, in all the science reporting, which is obviously wonderful and positive, that you look for the word music, you will not find it. And it's like
Mendel Kahlen's one of the only people who's been doing research. And
our friend Mendel Kahlen, he's a neuroscientist that actually came with me on the Taos expedition to Ecuador, and he was studying the effects of music on the brain in psychedelics, and he's started a company called Wave Paths, which I couldn't recommend strongly enough. He's gathered.
We both
contributed to this, and what it is sort of, it's driven by AI, but it's actually music pulled from a wide range of artists in the psychedelic and sort of healing music genre, and the AI is, you can basically, the therapist can guide where the mood goes in the music, so you can go, okay, we need to deepen, or we need to intensify, or we need to go, calmer or whatever. And he has like really good taste in music, so you listen to it and you can have it on its most minimal mode in the background, just as ambient music in your house, and it's so good, and it's never the same, because it's just expanding the pool of musicians in it. And but also you can get super intense with it. So therapists, and I believe that some ketamine clinics are already using it, so they can sit there and they can go, right, this person needs,
that's cool,
dial up the grueling
dial
factor.
Up the gruel.
More pain.
More pain.
Turn that up to 9.
But that's, I recommend everyone checking that out. It's amazing.
In is going to be released at the time of this album, so check it out. All places where music is found, I suppose.
Yeah.
And Music for Psychedelic Therapy, also incredible. I can't recommend these more. As I said, some of the most profound musical and just experiences, period, of my life have come from you two gentlemen. So I'm forever grateful, and on behalf of the world, forever grateful for all of the work that you guys are doing. It's been incredible. Also, for if you guys are interested in that bed that I was talking about, the website is Feel Opus. So go to feelopus.com. You can check it out, and maybe these guys, if they're inspired, you'll hear them drop some of their tracks through this fucking portal at some point down the line. We'll see how it goes. We will see how it goes. Thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you for the support. That was a great event, and just over the years, man, thanks for supporting all this work.
Of course.
Yeah, I echo that.
It's what we're here for.
Yeah,
it's what we're here for, and it comes from just really, like, I love life and people and the world. Like I, at the bottom, at the very core of everything, like, this is the place of transcendence. Just it's amazing. Like, this world is amazing. Let's keep it going. Let's play the infinite game. Let's love each other. Let's live. I want my kids to be able to jump off waterfalls and go fishing in the ocean and, live the life that we know is possible. And so we got some work to do to make sure that happens.
Dreaming it up together.
That's right. That's right. And sitting around the fire
at the same time. That's all there is to do.
Thanks so much, y'all. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.